Star Trek III: The Search for Spock is what I would call a pure sequel. It follows directly from The Wrath of Khan, continuing the themes and plot lines from that film. As a matter of fact, it was originally going to be called Star Trek III: Return to Genesis. It's a pretty crappy title, but I like the idea better than The Search for Spock, since there's really no searching involved. Anyway, as you can infer from the title, Spock's death gets reversed in this film, but what a lot of people wondered was, how did they get Leonard Nimoy back? Well, interestingly, Nimoy did not want to do Star Trek II until they promised him a death scene. That much a lot of people know. But I don't know exactly how it works out. Maybe he just enjoyed working on that movie so much, but whatever happened, he changed his mind, and when Paramount approached him about the possibility of appearing in Star Trek III, not only was he enthusiastic about the idea, but he expressed his desire to direct the film. He had never directed a film before, only having directed episodes of TV shows. Interestingly, never Star Trek either, so Paramount was a bit skeptical, but he must have done the Vulcan nerve pinch on them or something, because he did get to sit in the director's chair for this one. Nimoy's approach to Star Trek is somewhat of a compromise between Meyer, who directed The Wrath of Khan, and Wise, who directed the motion picture. Gone was the heavily militaristic feel of The Wrath of Khan, replaced by a feeling of familiarity and camaraderie. Also, the film is less of a swashbuckling adventure and more of a space opera. In some ways, I found it to be influenced by Star Wars. Out of all the Star Trek films made based on the original show, it does the best job of showing off life in Starfleet. It's colorful and vibrant, with various aliens interacting with each other and a feeling of unity in the Federation, but also a sense of danger and mysticism. Death was a big theme of the last film, and this one continues with themes of religion and cultural mysticism. The basic premise is that if they know they're about to die, Vulcans put the sum of their knowledge and essence, essentially their katra, into another person, and their body is to be returned to Vulcan for its final rest, its soul joining the planet. Kirk was unaware of this and had a Starfleet funeral for Spock, his body being deposited on the Genesis planet. Spock's father, Ambassador Sarek, shows up and assumes that Spock's katra is with Kirk, though he finds this to be false because they were separated when Spock died. Sarek then believes that Spock's spirit is truly lost, but Kirk comes up with the idea that maybe he melded with someone else, and upon reviewing the security tapes, essentially the death scene from the previous movie, they find that it was Bones who got Spock's soul, which is not surprising considering that Bones is losing his mind, and at times acts like he thinks he's Spock. The Enterprise crew gets a hero's welcome, but is mired in the bureaucracy of Starfleet. They're forbidden to go back to Genesis or even speak of it. Instead, a science team is sent, including Saavik and Kirk's son David. Saavik is played by a different actress, Robin Curtis, because Kirstie Alley wanted too much money to return. Anyway, they're reading some life signs on the planet other than vegetation, so they go check it out. They find Spock's coffin, which soft-landed due to the weird gravity when the planet was forming, and they find these worm creatures, evolved forms of microbes that were in the coffin. It turns out the whole planet is aging rapidly because of protomatter David used in creating the Genesis device, and it made the planet unstable. They find that Spock's body is missing, so they go off looking and find a small Vulcan child. Turns out the Genesis effect revived him, but he's a kid, though aging rapidly. And because he has no katra, he's sort of mindless and can't talk. When Spock starts going through the painful Vulcan version of puberty, Saavik decides to help him out the only way she knows how. Boning. Actually, that scene always bugged me. Basically, she's having sex with a 14-year-old version of Spock, and because he has no katra, is essentially mindless, so she's taking advantage of him. Most illogical. Must be that Romulan ancestry of hers. Anyway, meanwhile, we got a lot of people wanting to come back to Genesis. Kirk, when he finds out he did the wrong thing with Spock's body, wants to go back and find it and return him home to Vulcan, but he's forbidden by Starfleet to do so. McCoy is also trying to do this independently, but is caught by Starfleet and put in jail because he's crazy. Kirk breaks him out, and along with Scotty, Chekhov, and Sulu, they steal the Enterprise and head off to Genesis. Starfleet sends their newer, faster ship, the Excelsior, after them, but Scotty had disabled it, while Uhura makes arrangements to meet them on Vulcan. There's also Krug, a Klingon captain played by Christopher Lloyd. The look of the Klingons evolved since the motion picture, with the forehead ridges becoming more subtle. It's the look that would be used from then on, and is the most familiar. The Klingons are no longer in open war with the Federation, though they're not friendly. There's currently a truce between them. Krug gets himself inside information about Genesis and becomes interested in the device. The Klingons' understanding of the device is limited. Krug sees it merely as a planet-destroying weapon, not a terraforming device. The Klingons destroy the science ship and capture David, Saavik, and Spock, and when Kirk arrives, him and Krug have a space battle with both ships being heavily damaged. Krug thinks he's at Kirk's mercy, but the Enterprise was already heavily damaged by Khan, so they're a sitting duck. Kirk tries to bluff Krug, but the Klingon is smarter than that and uses his hostages to his advantage. To prove his point, he gives the order to execute one, and when they attempt to kill Saavik, David fights with them, though he's killed in the process. The scene is brutal and to the point, and the lack of a film score in that scene underscores it. Kirk is devastated and comes up with a plan. He and his crew beam down to the planet and allow the Klingons to board the Enterprise, which then self-destructs. The Enterprise blowing up is a hell of a scene. Just imagine being a Star Trek fan watching this ship through 3 years of the show, 2 years of the animated show, and 3 movies. The Enterprise is the symbol of Star Trek, and in this film, it meets its end. There's a great fight scene at the end where Kirk and Krug battle it out as the planet tears itself apart. Kirk wins, killing the Klingon, and they capture the Klingon ship, taking Spock and Bones to Vulcan, where a ritual is done that restores Spock's soul to his body, essentially resurrecting him. While the Wrath of Khan is about death, the search for Spock is about sacrifice. In the previous movie, Spock sacrificed his life to save the ship, saying that the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few or the one. In this film, Kirk proves that the opposite can be true. To save his friend, he sacrifices his good standing, destroys the Enterprise, and loses his son. But he says that sometimes the needs of the few outweigh the needs of the many. There's a great exchange between Kirk and Sarek, where Sarek asks, was it all worth it? And Kirk says it was. If he didn't try, he felt he would have lost his own soul. Okay, here's where I blow all your stupid preconceived notions right out of the water. The idea that all odd-numbered Star Trek films are inferior is possibly the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. People like to just look for patterns where there are none because they're fucking dick flaps. This movie fucking rules. I find it to be every bit as good as The Wrath of Khan, and in some ways it's better. Maybe because Nimoy is directing, but the movie doesn't focus solely on Kirk like the last two did. Many of the lesser characters get great moments. Scotty, Uhura, Sulu, Chekhov, they all have at least one great scene. There's a real feel of loss with David dying and the Enterprise exploding, but there's hope in the end. Spock is back. Out of the first 3 Trek films, I find the search for Spock to be the most like the show, at least in terms of characterization and tone. The crew isn't as militaristic as the last film, and the themes are not as abstract as the first film. I really don't understand exactly what it is about this film that a lot of people don't like. I think the only valid point they have is that it cheapens Spock's death scene to bring him back so soon, but hell, I disagree. It would have cheapened it if maybe Spock showed up in the first 10 minutes and everything was back to normal and then they had an unrelated adventure, but this is a true continuation and a lot had to be sacrificed to get Spock back. It truly is a space opera. My only complaint in relation to The Wrath of Khan is Krug. He's great, mostly because of Christopher Lloyd's performance, but compared to Khan, he's a very one-dimensional villain. That being said, when picking which one I like more, The Wrath of Khan or The Search for Spock, it's just too hard for me, so I give him the same score. Star Trek III: The Search for Spock gets a 9 out of a possible 10.